Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining Pindo and Trey for our webinar, Why Retention is the New Growth for Product Leaders. We're really excited to have you all. My name is Tyler Crumpler, and I'm on the Pindo marketing team, so I'll be you guys' moderator for today. Before we get started, I want to just go over a few housekeeping items. So first off, just so you know, this webinar will be recorded, and we will be sharing that recording out with everybody within 24 hours of the webinar. We'll also have a section for Q&A at the end. So we have a Q&A function on the Zoom webinar. If you guys want to submit questions as they come to you throughout the presentation, that's great, and we can address them at the end. But we're also just going to kind of open it up, and you guys will have plenty of time to ask those questions, and we'll get those answered for you guys. So today we're going to be going through how retention plus upsell are the new growth, how to leverage product data and automation, and how to build the right tech stack. So now I'd like to introduce our speakers. On the Pindo side, we have Chad. He's the Senior Director of Platform. Chad, do you want to give us a little bit on your background?
Sure, thanks, Tyler. So Chad Burnette, been at Pindo for about a year and a half. I lead up our platform team. Basically, we work to extend our capabilities, our ability to integrate with other systems, bring data basically in and out of Pindo. For those of you that don't know, Pindo helps product teams deliver value to their customers. It does a couple interesting things. It basically instruments web applications, mobile applications, lets you know everything that your customers are doing in your application. But you can also use it to reach out and deliver in-app communications directly, in your product. Before this, I was at a company called Box for about 5.5 years, also attempting to build up their platform core business.
Cool. Thanks, Chad. We're really excited to have you here today. So next, I'm going to introduce Bella, who is the head of product at Trey. Bella, do you want to give us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, hi guys. My name's Bella. I head up the product team at Trey. I'm based in London in the UK with the rest of our product and engineering team. Been at Trey for coming up to 2 years now, which has been great. And just a little bit about Trey, we're a general automation platform. So we enable users to connect and integrate applications that they use and move data across those different applications so that, data is not siloed and it can move from kind of app to app and team to team as well. So it's a good one.
Great. Thanks, Bella. Again, we're super excited to have you both here today. And with that, I'm going to move in to get us started. So as you guys all know, some of the past strategies for engaging with your customers may not work today. So Bella, I'm going to pass this off to you to go ahead and start to give us some of your thoughts and observations on what you're seeing there.
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, the last sort of 18 months of life doing product management at Trey has almost kind of changed in the last 2 or 3 months, right? So in some areas we've pivoted, and in other areas we've kind of totally reprioritized to focus kind of in a laser beam on retaining our customers at the expense of maybe previously where it was kind of the hyper growth phase of, acquire new logos, land grab, stuff like that. Now we're kind of refocusing to say, okay, let's retain our customers, let's make them happy, let's expand these accounts. And that's where our energy is going now.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in from the Pindo side. Obviously, this is a very unique time we're in. We've definitely made significant roadmap adjustments. We're very focused on literally the next 2 quarters. We've also shifted our focus heavily to the retention aspects of relationship with customers. So we're reaching out a lot more proactively. We're using Pindo itself, obviously, to communicate, to our customers as they come into Pindo, gather feedback more directly. It's interesting to get analytics and sort of usage data, but times like now, you really need to be much more aggressive in terms of getting qualitative feedback, meaning conversations, schedule a meeting in person with something like Calendly, and a Pindo guide. And then we're actually also, luckily, have the ability to help our customers reach out to their customers in the same way that we're reaching out to our customers with Pindo. And the last thing I'll say is we've essentially determined that near-term value and generating near-term value has to be the highest priority. So things that we may have worked on before right now that had maybe a 6 to 12 month time frame, we definitely pulled in shorter projects, and we're trying to get things out that help right now.
Nice. Thank you both for that. So now we're going to kind of move into, section 1 of this, which is retention plus upsell is the new growth for product leaders, right? So I'm going to pass this over to you, Bella.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of maths, right? Like it's just a lot easier and more efficient to retain and grow your current customers than it is to acquire new ones. It's 7 times more efficient. So that's kind of the basics, really. And kind of doing more with less, it just kind of naturally leads to this focus on retention and trying to kind of expand customers and upsell them. And also another thing that I kind of say is, as a product person, this is also kind of simpler. Like these are people that you have data around already. You know them, as Chad said. You've likely talked to them pretty frequently, and that emphasis on qualitative data and like the rich understanding of what problems they have. That's all then enabling you to strategically kind of prioritize what will help you retain these customers. Whereas when you're thinking about acquiring new customers, you don't know anything about them yet because they haven't been in your tool. So I think, as a product person, you're almost best placed to advise the business on this sort of thing because you know these people best.
Yeah, definitely. So it may take a second to kind of grok what's on this visual here. This is a study of around 6,000 SaaS companies about 1.5 years ago. And basically what it's showing is that the top 30% of that cohort in terms of growth roughly have 20 to 30% of their revenue coming from expansion, right? And if you think about it, this is basically built into the economics of how SaaS works. There's a very high cost upfront to win a customer and bring them on. And really the only way you're going to be successful is if you at least renew them over time and have a long-term relationship with them. Increase the LTV as much as possible, obviously. But you really, in order to succeed and be successful and be in that top 30%, you have to have expansion revenue. And that's where people talk about LTV to CAC ratio, the companies that are going to achieve that. And I'm sure everybody here on this call wants to be in that top 30%. You literally cannot ignore it. This percentage was higher than I would have thought before kind of looking into the data. So it's an interesting kind of data point.
Yeah, so I mean, like this is all really good stuff, and I think a lot of the kind of takeaways here are that this is nothing new that we don't already know, but kind of trying to reframe it for people on the call and say, well, what can I actually do? Tomorrow, if I were to clear my calendar and say, right, okay, I watched this webinar and I learned these 3 things, and this is what I'm going to do now. This is kind of how I would distill it. The first one is get that product usage data really accessible, get it really visual. And then you can start to either get as smart or as back of a napkin as you'd like with this to just create these kind of basic segments, right? Like what is low engagement for you in your vertical or in your particular area of the app, if that's what you're looking at, and what is high, what is great, what does that look like in the actual product usage data? And then once you've got those segments, you can start to kind of identify some key metrics, some kind of key goals around how those metrics can move, and then how that feeds into your priorities and also your strategy, right? So one thing that we've definitely focused on, and that I definitely think is important, chatting with others kind of in the industry, is to empower users to be kind of to self-serve, right? So to remove all friction that users might ever experience between them getting the answer themselves. And I think that kind of applies all the way across the kind of user lifecycle, from onboarding and potentially in the past having a really high touch onboarding approach where they'd learn all about your tool from co-devs, from sales engineers, also to kind of like heavy adoption where you've got customer success on the phone with the customers and saying, hey, what about this use case? Or what about, have you thought of introducing our tool to this other team? Actually, if you can get that kind of process a little bit more in the app and give it to users so that they can then kind of discover or identify or find that value for themselves without having to rely on someone else from, you know, your customer success or sales function to do it for them. I think that's incredibly important. Two kind of ways that we've done this specifically is to focus on content and documentation, so that, you know, our users can say, okay, I want to just have a frame of reference or a guide, or, you know, read something that might kind of expand my thinking in the way that I'm using this tool right now. You know, as much as obviously the best product design in the world will make your application incredibly intuitive, sometimes it is really useful to have that documentation to refer to. And then specifically, we've put a lot of energy into a new kind of educational resource that we call the Tray Academy that basically handholds users through learning our tool, but they do it obviously all in their own time. They can start videos, they can jump in, they can jump out. And we've seen some kind of really good success with that. And then the final thing I'd say, which is so important, is just to be smart about your resources, right? So look at the projects that you've got going on, and Chad rightly kind of said, like, bring things near term and bring that value shorter term. But, you know, look at what your technical side of the house is working on. And it should always be about delivering value and features that empower your customers right now. So, you know, thinking about integrations and your engineers having to build things in-house, or, you know, other jobs that the technical side of your business needs to do to enable the rest of the business is a bad way, really, kind of an inefficient way to utilize those resources. And I think it's a lot better to kind of find experts out there in the field so that you can dedicate the resource that you have in-house to your expertise and like specialize in your product in your area of the market that you kind of solve the problem for, and lean on other companies to kind of solve for their problems and their expertise, and not have to kind of do it all in-house. So I think that's kind of the final thing, is just get engineers focused on delivering value for your users, not necessarily kind of fiddling around with other stuff that engineers don't necessarily have to do.
Cool. So really appreciate the commentary on that. That was really good stuff. So with that, we're going to now move into, you know, kind of the second topic that we have on the docket for today. So that's kind of going into a little bit more onto how to actually use your product data and automation to increase your customer retention, reduce that friction, and accelerate that time to value for your users. And I think that plays nicely with a lot of the things you guys just spoke about. So with that, I'm going to turn it over for a couple of use cases, and I'm going to turn that over to Chad.
Sure. So for use case one, it's a very simple but powerful thing that you can do using tools like Pendo and Tray. And it's basically thinking about converting trial users to customers. And so my first thought after listening to this whole thing is like, okay, we're talking about a trial, so they're not a customer. But if you really think about it, if you get someone to actually sign up for a trial, it's almost like you are retaining them, right? You're retaining them into a mode where they're actually paying, but they're not just some random person out in the world. They've actually signed up for a trial. They're using your application. You've got the fish on the hook, right? So you can jump to the next slide. You know, a great thing that you can do using something like Pendo is actually create a segment of people who are your trial users. That's a very basic, you know, there's a lot more complicated ways you could dice that up in terms of have they been a trial for 30 days, for 60 days, and so forth. But let's say there's just a segment, it's people doing trials. You can communicate with them directly in app. You're getting usage information. You can look at reports about who's using the application, how often, daily actives, things like that. But a really powerful thing that you can completely automate using something like Tray and Pendo is basically, hey, like I've got someone who's at trial status. They have not done anything useful or meaningful. Maybe it's login, maybe it's used features more than X number of times. And you can automate basically reaching out to them using a tool like HubSpot, dropping them into an email campaign and trying to draw them back into the application. The great thing about this is once you set it up, right, there's it's not a manual process. This is just automatically happening in the background. And it's a great, this is probably one of our primary use cases that our customers use Pendo for. Go ahead and jump to the next one. Right, so the second great use of something like Pendo is basically taking all the insights that you get from instrumenting your application and retaining and or expanding that customer. So go ahead and jump to the next slide, please. Yeah, so NPS is a really popular component that we have. You can basically get quantitative feedback. You can also add text boxes to get qualitative feedback, but be much more proactive about reaching out, especially at times like these, like to your customers, and really get a sense of their health as in terms of a customer. As I mentioned before, usage data is great, but sometimes, especially now, you probably want to be much more proactive like we are and actually get a communication dialogue going with your customers. But again, using a tool like Trey, you can essentially take NPS information, and for example, anybody who is a detractor or essentially has a negative view of your product, you probably want to jump on that really quickly. So you would simply use Trey, funnel that into either Microsoft Teams or funnel that NPS response into Slack. You've got people monitoring those channels in your success team, and they can just immediately reach back out to that customer and figure out what the issue is, and have a much better shot at retaining them by addressing it in the near term.
Yeah, and I'll just kind of jump in quick. Like this happened to me this morning. So we have exactly that. We use an NPS tool, and then it pipes the data into like one channel that the whole company is in, and it's just called feedback. And we get both positive and negative in there. And we saw, someone with an NPS score of like 6 or 7, and we kind of immediately jumped on, okay, it's could be a lot better. And they gave some nice kind of qualitative feedback in the text box as well. So that gave us a little bit of color. And then there was a nice dialogue between me, the CEO, and the head of customer success to immediately kind of say, okay, who's in charge of that? Let's get on that. Like, let's sync on this. Like, yeah, sure, done. And just because it's visible, that's possible. Yeah, this is a fun one. This is kind of a use case that we do internally. So, as kind of Chad said, it's always a mix, right, of qualitative and quantitative data to understand your customers. And what we've tried to do is basically just create a huge amount of data points, and using Trey, kind of take data from all of the different places that our users will kind of give us that data, like, clicks, different visits, or different places across our product portfolio that they've engaged with us, and also their actual in-app usage, and kind of translate that into something that's kind of really meaningful for us as a kind of North Star and as a whole company. So Tyler, if you want to jump to the next one, I can kind of show people what this looks like. So bear with me on this. So this is what we call the Trey skateboard. You don't really need to get from A to B in a car. You can just build out a skateboard, gets you there. So this is kind of our pass at this before we kind of iterate and make it a little bit more concrete. But I'll just kind of walk through why we've done it the way that we've done it. So I think every kind of product person knows that you have your North Star metric, right? And maybe it's, number of tweets, or it's frequency of tweets, or whatever it might be for your particular industry or your particular product. And I think that is really useful, but it is just one data point and a little bit kind of flash in the pan. So what we wanted to do is build out a North Star metric that was kind of 3 key things. First of all, was really resilient and not kind of subject to big spikes in changes of different parts of the different data points, kind of skewing it. The other one was just make it kind of really rich, a lot of data points across a lot of different places. And then finally, we wanted a kind of North Star metric that was really applicable outside of just the product team. So it can mean something to, customer success, to sales, to marketing. And so what we kind of came on is something that we call the user score. And this is what this kind of graph shows. And it basically allows us to create multiple kind of sub-metrics. And to that point of like resilience, there's 3 kind of buckets. The first bucket is basically, engagement. And for some people, this might just be activity. It might just be DAUs or MAUs. But for us, because of the way that our product works, sometimes people logging in a lot is actually an indicator that they're not particularly happy. If you have to change an automation a lot, then you want it just running nicely in the background, as Chad has clearly done with his own automations. But so that's kind of important to us, right? The engagement piece to start with. And then the second bucket is value. So if you think about that question, what would happen if your users ripped your product out tomorrow? Like, would everybody be incredibly worried? Would everybody be totally fine and not notice? And then the final piece for us is capability, right? So how good are your users at using your tools? So on this graph, what you can see is the capability is along the x-axis, the engagement or kind of level of activity is along the y, and then the size of the bubble kind of indicates value. And there's like, I think something like over 50 different data points that kind of make this up. But because we have Trey kind of powering getting that data into a kind of data warehouse, the analytics team then have a really rich source of data to kind of build out this kind of user score metric that is a little bit of our sort of holy grail. So that's just a little bit on our skateboard.
Cool, and I'll just jump in at the end here. So Pendo collects a lot of data just from people using your application, and then we also give you the ability to put up NPS surveys, just other surveys, polls, all kinds of information, feedback, like we have a whole feedback product. And typically, like say before this whole pandemic period that we're going through, a product manager might look at dashboards like this once a week, right? And try to get a feel of how their customers are doing in their product, how usage is going, what the health of each customer is. I think now you probably want to be looking at that on a daily basis, right? There's just a lot of things in motion. A lot's going on with your customer base as is going on with your own company. And I think it's just, a tool like Pendo acts as that kind of single pane of glass for product information. And it just gives you, if you're a product manager or if you're a success manager, you really want to be staying on top of this stuff right now.
Cool. Yeah, I think that was really helpful. So as we're coming up here on, kind of this third initiative here around how to connect a tech stack that enables your teams to scale and drive those efficiencies. We're getting close to that Q&A section. So I just want to remind everybody, we have that Q&A feature and you guys can start to put those in there as we get a little bit closer to that. So with that, I'm going to push this over to Bella.
Yeah, so I think, this is really important always, but I think especially important now, right? The CEO at Trey is always kind of saying, how would you spend this dollar if it's your last dollar? And I think that then speaks to the buying practices that everyone is now kind of adopting. So there's kind of twofold on this slide, really, because it's about how can you as product people make sure that you're best placed to kind of implement some of the ideas or things that we've kind of advised. But also from a product strategy point of view, it's how can you make sure that your product is easily fitting into this kind of right tech stack bucket. So firstly, I think having access to all the features, there are tools out there that really kind of nickel and dime on some stuff. It always leaves a little bit of a sour taste in my mouth when I'm evaluating vendors, and it's like, oh, but you need to pay for that. Oh, and this doesn't come with the package. Oh, and if you want additional seats, you need to pay. And I'm just kind of like, at this time in the game, I don't want to have to talk to someone to unlock some feature that actually in the moment I really need. And that takes time. I've got to go on intercom or whatever other else kind of chat function that particular vendor might have or whatever. And I think that you just got to look for tools that get you successful from the start. So give you access to everything that you need, all the functionality, if they've got a public API, obviously that's always something that I'm looking for. And I think that's pretty important. I think the second piece is, okay, once you've evaluated tools that kind of can really help you and are going to help you deliver value to your users, is this tool going to end up being siloed in my team? Or can I actually open the insights that this tool might give me and ping them out to other teams or allow other people to view them, and to enable the sort of facilitation of collaboration and visibility. So, pulling data from place to place is incredibly important. So, a general automation platform, I think, is important one for the stack, but obviously I will say that. And then, automating processes between the different tools that you have and making sure that you're able to do that. I know Chad has some thoughts on this third one.
Yeah, so in terms of gathering the data without needing a lot of engineering, there's sort of two ways to look at this. One, Pendo is kind of unique in the analytics space and the way that we approach gathering data. So basically we have a JavaScript snippet, you instrument your application one time, and we just start collecting usage data. And then a product manager, without having to go and have an engineer drop, this event, this event, this event, product managers, non-technical people can go into Pendo and basically point out, this is a feature, this is a feature, this is an important page. And we retroactively go back and sort of recreate all of the analytics and the world, if you will, based on you telling us what's important. That doesn't require an engineer at all. So it's sort of unique in the marketplace with that. And then the other aspect is actually just getting data in and out of Pendo from other systems, right? So that's where over the last 6 months, my team has made a lot of interesting sort of improvements to Pendo in terms of getting metadata from any source into Pendo, having it tagged correctly that it's from HubSpot or Salesforce or Stripe or Zendesk, and basically being able to then create segments, use any of that data basically in our giant rules engine that we have for targeting communications and doing analytics, and then also getting information out. So we've created a real-time event system, webhooks, we can send data directly to a tool like Segment. But what a lot of this has led to is that if you use something like Tray that has connectors to 200 different applications or so, all of that information can be basically pushed into Pendo. So we haven't actually even mentioned this yet, but so there is now an official Pendo connector within Tray. It knows how to get data out, it knows how to push data in. And because it can connect to 200 plus other systems, any of that information across your tech stack can be used to actually improve your product. So one thing we talked about the other day when we were kind of going through these is I don't really think of it as a stack so much as a network of systems. And just like any network, the value of the network is basically proportional to the number of nodes that are connected, right? So if you think about, you've got Zendesk, you've got Stripe, you've got a HubSpot, you've got various other systems that are collecting customer data. If you can take all of that and have data flowing basically completely around the network, all of those tools get exponentially better. So that's kind of where we're looking to play. That's why we've made the improvements that we have. Like we want Pendo to just naturally drop into any tech ecosystem and immediately add value.
Yeah, and I'll just kind of quickly say on that, that's kind of exactly what I think the strategy needs to be for product teams, right? Is to be looking to kind of facilitate the movement of that data. And I think that's why the way that the kind of Tray platform really helps users do this, and like I'm glad to hear that it's helping Pendo, and we've got a few kind of examples of that, is that it can be the kind of central nervous system, right, that permeates and connects all the different tools that you use and facilitates that network happening. And what's nice is that you can build out things yourself instead of kind of, as I was saying before, like pulling in engineers to say, okay, we need to build like a native integration between this and this, or actually just internally to enable data to go from tool A that the customer success team uses to other tools like Teams or Slack to give it visibility. You can just build that out quickly yourself, which is always a nice thing. I don't have a engineering background, but I'm able to build out these automations, and it's pretty easy to do, which then kind of just enables that data to flow, as you say, kind of around the network or around the ecosystem.
Yeah, that was super, super awesome, guys. Even as just like the moderator, kind of hearing you guys riff on these things and really talk about some of your experiences, like it was super enlightening and very helpful. So I'm sure everyone on the call feels the same. So now we're going to move to the Q&A portion of this webinar. We've already got quite a few questions here, but keep them coming. We've got plenty of time to get those answered. So first one here, Bella, I think this one goes pretty good or aligns very well to you. So how do you measure capability and what is the definition of capability?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I mean, I painted a lovely picture of a perfect capability score. I'm actually right in the middle of iterating on it because we're finding that we need to add more data points into it. So Chad kind of talked previously around connectors. So Tray is a kind of general automation platform. We've got 350 plus connectors, which are kind of a wrapper around an API for any given service. And some of them are a lot kind of simpler to use than others. So, something like Teams or Slack have some pretty easy operations to use, like send message. And we're finding that there's a kind of segment of our users who are really proficient or even kind of more expert and really adept at using that, but then they don't necessarily touch tools that, or they don't necessarily touch the connectors that might have what we term as more difficult to use, like operations that are trickier to kind of get the data in and out of. And so that's one way that we kind of look at capability, how good are people at interacting with these different APIs as connectors. And then other things is we look generally at kind of our power users and then cycle back. So we say, okay, if we've got this segment of users, let's look at what they're doing to make them power users, and let's comprise our capability score of a range of can they do this or can they not, and then kind of construct sort of bands in capability based off of what our power users can do versus what maybe some kind of less technical users can do.
Yeah, I think that was really awesome. So we're gonna go to the next one here. So Chad, I'm gonna kick this one to you. How would you approach revenue expansion for B2B platforms on multi-year contracts? What is some of the things you would measure or communicate out around there?
Yeah, so we basically had, like, both at Pendo and at Box, we thought through this problem constantly, right? Because in typical subscription-based landscapes, right, you've got a product, you sign someone up for a 3-year contract, they're paying a certain price and they've got a certain feature set. But we're constantly developing new functionality, right? So there's this question of, is functionality just included, or is this something that drives significant value that you basically upsell to them, right? So we talked about expansion via upsell. So the way we approach it, and a lot of times this is things, to give you an example, like more enterprise features, right? Like at Box, we let you own your own encryption key, right? That was like a year-long project, tons of value. But the way that we got to that was basically by getting feedback from customers. So what I would say is, like, communicate with customers, literally get feedback from them, use a tool like Pendo Feedback, what are the most requested pieces of functionality that people are asking for, divide them up into, is this something that just rolls into a subscription, or is this something that's chunky and significant enough that we could actually upsell that? And we'll have straight up conversations with customers to try to get to the value, right? Is this a $10,000 problem? Is this a $100,000 problem? Is this something that you're not willing to pay for? The only way you can arrive there is through basically getting feedback and by doing some testing. So another way to approach it potentially would be to use tools like feature flagging tools like Launch Darkly, build a little bit of an MVP, using a tool like Pendo, identify a segment of people who, based on using something similar, might be interested in that, activate that using the feature flag, and then start getting feedback from them using basically in-app communications from Pendo. So that's a way to approach it. It totally depends on kind of the target audience of your product, but that's a general framework.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thanks for sharing, Chad. So this next question, I'm actually going to pose to both of y'all. So I'm going to kick it to Bella first, and then you, Chad. This question is around alignment and prioritization. So when choosing a success key metric is always tough. What are some of the criticisms of the rolled up user score you settled on, and how did you overcome those critiques and get detractors aligned?
Sure. So, I mean, the user score has some internal great champions, but yeah, it's always kind of sometimes what we've found with the kind of implementation and rollout of that metric is that there's a misunderstanding at times around the buckets, right? So people might say, oh, the score is X, but actually, when you dig into the buckets, the three buckets that underpin it, capability, engagement, and value, actually it might be skewed a little bit. And sometimes people can take the overall score at face value without really digging into the buckets. And that can then lead to just misunderstanding and then kind of like drawing conclusions that aren't necessarily correct. And obviously, like, we're not there every time to be like, oh, remember, like, explain, look here, like, there's more, it's richer than that. So we're almost kind of suffering at our own hands with the number of data points and the richness of the data underlying the metric. But I think something that we're going to work on, specifically me and the head of data analytics, is kind of internal enablement around how to apply the score and the metric, so that we can kind of help people in different functions and different contexts to say, what is the most useful thing for you specifically in your role to look at, and how can you kind of answer more questions, right? You know, the first thing people always have once they've dug into the data a little bit is, oh, okay, it's leading me to ask this. And then kind of enable people internally to say, okay, and then if you want to find out more, go here, go here, go here.
Yeah, I'll just answer it from a different perspective in terms of the tooling around this. So one of the things that Pendo does that I mentioned is basically this retroactive analytics. So figuring out what the key metric is, like, I'll leave, Bella answered that well, I think, but it's going to change, right? You're going to learn from what you measure. You're going to measure the measurement, right? And figure out, okay, maybe it's correct, maybe it's off, maybe we need this piece of information. So one of the really cool things about Pendo is, as time goes by, we're collecting all of the usage data. And then at any point in time, you can actually say, oh, actually this metric right here, or this feature I recognize now is super important. And you just tell Pendo this is important, and we literally go back and recompute analytics from 6 years ago, if that's how much data you have, as if you had been instrumenting it that way all along. So tools like Amplitude, Mixpanel, for those of you that have used those, are very much event-based, right? You literally have to drop in, this is important, this is important, this is important. And as time goes by, there's no way to retroactively go tell it like, oh, I really needed to measure X, right? So that's just a unique aspect of how Pendo can help with that.
Nice. Thank you, Chad, for adding that. I'm actually going to kick this next one to you to start as well, Chad. So how would you, oh, sorry, wrong one. So specifically for a B2B use case with account-based analytics rather than user-based analytics, what would you measure and how would you measure it?
So again, this is interesting in the way Pendo approaches this. So we have the notion of visitor in Pendo, and we have the notion of an account, right? An account is your customer. Visitors are basically people, within that account. So you can think of an account as essentially being a roll-up of a whole bunch of data about individual visitors, right? So there's a lot of things you can do in terms of creating segments of accounts where it's basically feeding off of that information about what specific people are doing. But also, because we have integrations with things like Salesforce and HubSpot and tools that have a lot of information about your account level, you can pull in things like, what is the ARR attached to this account? Like how old is this account? What's going on in Zendesk in terms of support tickets across my entire account, right? So you've got individual visitors filing support tickets, but Pendo can show you a roll up of like, hey, for some reason, within this account, there's been a 10% spike in support tickets in the last 7 days, just across that entire account, like what's going on. So that's, in terms of what you measure, that's definitely going to depend on your application a lot. But a tool like Pendo can basically give you that easy roll up. I would say we have product managers and we have customer success are probably our two biggest groups of users. Customer success really dials into the account level metrics, whereas the product managers typically want to go look at, hey, this individual person gave us this NPS score. We read their comment. Let me reach out to them and actually talk to them and figure out what the problem is, or what the why they're so pleased.
Nice. Thank you, Chad. So Bella, we're gonna kick this next one to you. So when re-engaging a client that is in the red or is already churned, how do you begin that conversation, and then how do you measure success? So I'm sure part of that usage is part of that, but what % should we be looking at for healthy growth or usage?
Yeah, I mean, kind of as Chad said, there's so many different kind of metrics around success, right? Especially if you're looking at customers as opposed to just users singularly, but the whole customer account. And I think, if your success metrics are about, are they not just being retained, but are they actually expansion? What proportion of our revenue is coming from expansion? And if that's your success metric, then I would kind of cycle back and say, okay, if we've re-engaged someone, ultimately our indicator of success is not only that we've retained them, but we've also upsold or expanded the account. And there's a number of different ways that you can do that. I think to kind of start with immediately when you're kind of re-engaging a user, I think it's all about kind of illustrating value really, really fast. So, it might be that you can kind of provide suggestions and enable that discovery. As I'm kind of saying, hopefully you can do it in app without needing to rely on other members of your team to kind of go out and engage them in a much more kind of physical basis. But you can kind of say, okay, looking at the services that you use, like maybe it's Slack and it's, a NPS provider like Pendo, like what could we suggest that you would do around not just NPS scores, but also using data from Pendo to then power other customer success platforms that you might also use, and kind of saying, okay, you built some automation that looks at Pendo and looks at NPS, but what about, what tool you use for internal collaboration? Have you thought about using the Slack connector a little bit more, or, make suggestions around pulling data to help push that into Salesforce so that you can see if your team is kind of retaining or trying to upsell customers, that actually you've got that product usage data in something like Salesforce, so that the sales team don't have to go around the houses and say, what is this customer actually doing, but it's there for them. And something like Trey can kind of pull and push data from the different tools that you have and kind of give it to the different teams that are involved in retaining a customer or upselling them into their kind of like place or source of truth, or their kind of home and habitat, as it were. Instead of them having to go round and look for it, you can kind of stay in Salesforce if you're an AE or other tools like that. So I think that's the key thing, is about looking at what success is for you, and then enabling all of the teams that make up the collaborative path to success have the data that they need at the right time, and making it really visible so that they can act on it really fast.
Yeah, I think that was a great answer, Bella. So we're coming up right at 1:45. So I think we've got time for one more question. So Chad, I'm gonna kick this one over to you. So what are some of the leading indicators that it's a good time to upsell or cross-sell services to an existing client? Are there things that maybe you see or tend to have seen in this role or past roles in the product that may indicate that it's a good time for that?
Yeah, I mean, so you definitely want to take into account things like customer health, usage of your product, right? Is this particular account using a wide breadth of your functionality? Are they using, for example, more of your enterprise focused functionality, and you've got another piece of enterprise functionality that's about to come out? Those are probably the people that you'd want to reach out to. In terms of timing it, what I would say is that one interesting piece of functionality that Pendo has is when customers push guides or information. So for example, the announcement of a new piece of functionality, maybe it's a beta program that you want to enroll people into. We've built a very complex, if you think about it, guide and communication throttling system. So you might have 10 different upsell programs that you're running. And the last thing you want is for one account to be bombarded with 10 different, hey, join this beta, check this out. So using Pendo, you can essentially sequence those. You can set up timings like don't show anyone who's seen this beta announcement, another beta announcement for 30 days, for example. So in terms of the actual tactical communication, Pendo helps a lot in terms of then just how you arrive at that cadence. That's definitely going to depend sort of on your product, and then also kind of what the new features are that are coming out. But that's roughly how I would approach it.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Chad. So with that said, we're gonna wrap this up. So if we didn't get to your question, we will reach out to you, following this, and we'll get that answered for you. Just really quick, I want to thank, everyone in the audience for taking the time to join us today. I hope you found this very beneficial for the goals you were trying to solve. And I also want to thank Bella and Chad, y'all for taking your time to kind of go over these things and share your experiences with us.
Sure.
If we wrap this up, we'll be sharing a recording of this out with you guys within the next 24 hours. And here's some good parting resources for you all if you'd like to learn a little bit more about Trey or Pendo. So thanks again, everybody, for joining us, and have a nice rest of your day.
Bye. Thanks.